I'm so glad that you're here tonight. My name is Dory Drachman, and I am leading the effort of Peterborough Energy Action to pass warrant Article 11, which commits the town to a just transition to 100% renewable energy. And before we start, I would like to thank the Monadnock Sustainability Hub, who has sponsored us in this campaign. They've supported us in many ways, but most impactfully by bringing Annie Henry in to help us with our communications and events. And so we are very grateful for all of her help and the help of the whole hub. As you can see, our mission is to transition Peterborough to 100% clean, affordable, renewable energy for all, and specifically 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and 100% renewable heat and transportation by 2050. We also, as part of that, are asking for a plan to be crafted by the end of 2022 so that we have at least some kind of a roadway to direct us in toward 100% renewable. And we know that this is an ambitious goal. Fortunately, we don't have to reinvent the wheel because there are many communities that have already committed to this goal. Over 200 communities in the US, which translates into over 25% of Americans living in a community that has committed to 100% renewable energy. And in New Hampshire, there are 5 other communities that have already committed to this, including our neighbor Keene, which is the most recent municipality to commit to this, and Hanover, which actually was the first community to commit to 100% renewables. And we are very lucky tonight to have Mary Brunner from Keene and April Salas from Hanover to talk about their process and their pathway as they see it to 100% renewable. They have very different approaches, which to me is actually very comforting because it means that we don't have to do it a particular way. We can find the way that works best for Peterborough. So I would first like to introduce our speakers. April Salas is the Town of Hanover's Chief Sustainability Officer. She also serves, on the Sustainable Hanover Committee and advises the town on community power aggregation and other strategic pathways to reach 100% renewable goals. She is also the executive director at the Revers Center for Energy at the Tuck School of Business, where she oversees a range of programming and activities related to the transition to sustainable energy. We also want to welcome Mary Brunner, who works as a city planner for the city of Keene. And part of her time is spent providing staff support to the city's Energy and Climate Committee and the Community Power Committee. She was also the primary author of the city's recently approved Sustainable Energy Plan. So we are in good hands tonight to hear about these really wonderful pathways that these 2 neighboring New Hampshire communities can share with us and that we can learn from. I'm going to hand it over first to Mary and hear about Keene's process and Keene's plan to move forward. Thanks so much, Mary.
Great, thank you, Dory, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm really excited to be here and excited to hear that the town of Peterborough is considering these goals. So can you go to the next slide, please? So as Dory mentioned, my name is Mary. I work for the city of Keene as a planner. And today I really want to talk about Keene's approach to these 100% renewable energy goals, which has really advanced in sort of 3 phases. The first one, which I wasn't personally involved with, was really organizing and building support for the goals. The second phase, which is where my role really started, was the planning phase. So trying to answer the question of, okay, how are we going to reach these goals? And then the third phase was putting that plan into action. And that's where we're just getting started. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I would definitely be remiss if I didn't mention the clean energy team. So Keene is very fortunate that we have a really active group of citizens that are committed to promoting clean and renewable energy in our community. And so it was really the clean energy team that initially learned about the Ready for 100 goals and was working on promoting them in the community. They're the ones who helped build the public and political support for the goals. They did a lot of different outreach to get support going for it. And then the picture that you see here is actually the clean energy team right after the city council committee meeting, where city council voted on the resolution to endorse the renewable energy goals. And they filled the room with people who were wearing green and asked city council to support the goals, which was really, really exciting. So next slide. So as you may have guessed, they were successful. City Council did vote in January of 2019 to adopt the Sustainable Energy Resolution, which you see here on the slide. Next slide, please. So this resolution endorses 3 separate goals. The first one is that the city of Keene will source all of its electricity from renewable energy sources by 2030. The second one is to source all of our heating and cooling energy from renewable sources by 2050. And the third goal is for all of our transportation energy to come from renewable energy by 2050. And I'm sorry, can you go back? So this resolution also, it further states that these aspirational goals will apply to the entire community, not just municipal operations. And it also called for the city to develop a strategic plan to achieve these goals by December of 2020. So in other words, we gave ourselves about 2 years to develop a plan to achieve the goals that we had just set for ourselves. All right, now next slide. So that really brings us to the second phase, which again is the planning phase, or trying to answer the question of how do we get there. So I do want to note that for the city, this was kind of a new realm for us. The city has been working internally for over 20 years on climate action and trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce our carbon footprint. So the city had a lot of experience working on that internally, but this is really the first time that we were trying to ask the larger community to make that commitment with us. Next slide, please. So from the very beginning, the Energy and Climate Committee was tasked with developing a plan to reach these aspirational goals with help from staff. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but this graphic is really just meant to give you an overview of the kind of the process that they followed. So everything from developing a baseline to gathering input from the public, researching and prioritizing strategies, and then developing the plan itself. Next slide, please. So one of the pieces that we felt was really important to include in the plan was establishing a baseline so that we know, where and we know how far we have to go to reach our goals. This was much easier for the electricity baseline. That was relatively simple and easy compared to transportation and thermal. For that baseline, we basically just needed to, Keene is served entirely by Eversource. So we got all of our data from Eversource. We did hire consultants who helped us with this portion of the plan. But again, I think that baseline was much easier for us to do. The transportation and thermal, which included heating and cooling, that was a lot trickier. So for that piece of the plan, we just didn't have the same data sources available to us. So we had to get a little bit more creative. And we were really lucky to have a graduate student intern work with us from Antioch, who she did the internship for class credit and really helped us come up with some creative ways to develop a thermal and transportation baseline. For anyone who's interested in seeing that, it's all in chapter 3 of our energy plan. Next slide, please. Another sort of piece to this that we thought was very important, we actually got this idea from Hanover, was to define what our guiding values are for developing the plan. So we knew where we helped us decide sort of how we were going to get there. So for example, early on, we decided that not only so that's just one example of a guiding principle that we kind of kept in mind throughout the whole planning process, and we also included in the plan itself. Vision statement using an online poll. It's all online at keenenergyplan.com. So we go to the next slide. And then finally, I just want to mention part of the reason why our planning process took 2 years is because we spent a lot of time doing public outreach and both help us plan our outreach and engagement and also conduct the outreach and engagement. So we started by doing interviews. We did focus groups. We had an in-person community workshop kind of early on. We had representatives from other communities, including Julia Griffin from Hanover, who came and spoke to us to kind of help share ideas and help us kind of see the possibilities of where we could go. We also did online surveys. We gave presentations to various different community groups, developed a project website. We had a virtual community forum during COVID. I do want to highlight one of the activities that we did that I think was very successful, which we called community energy conversations. So basically we had volunteers, not city staff, but volunteers who were really wanted to see in Keene. They took notes and then they sent those notes back to staff. And so we were able to incorporate the feedback into the plan. And what was great about it is we were able to reach some groups that, traditionally we don't really see show up to a public meeting, like a Girl Scout troop came to one of them. So it was just a way to reach some people that we normally wouldn't see. Next slide, please. So our sustainable energy plan was recently adopted in January of 2021. And even before the plan was adopted, we had already started working on implementation. Can you go to the next slide? So the top sort of priority, I guess, in our plan is to launch something that's called a community power program. And we're really excited about this because it has a lot of potential. Community power is basically a city operated group purchasing program that pools the electricity use of electricity customers in Keene in order to provide them with competitively priced electricity options. So with the program in Keene, Eversource will continue to be in charge of delivering the electricity and managing all billing. So the only change that the customer is going to see is the source and the cost of their electricity supply, which will be chosen So as proposed right now, and this is still a draft plan, so it has to go through City Council. And as proposed right now, the Keene Community Power Program would offer 4 electricity options. And the vast majority of people would be on the default option that's outlined in blue here, which is initially expected to have about between 5 to 10% more renewable energy than Eversource's basic supply. However, people who are in the program could also choose one of these optional products. So they could choose to go with a cheaper option, or they could choose to pay more to have extra renewable energy. Next slide, please. So what does that mean in the context? Meant to show the New Hampshire's renewable portfolio standard up through 2023. So this is kind of what you would expect to see in your electricity mix if you're just getting your electricity supply from Eversource. If you click once, the dark green that you see here is the expected impact of the Keene Community Power Program in the near term. And then over time, we hope to increase the amount of renewable energy that's offered through the default product in order to reach our 100% renewable energy goal by 2030. Next slide, please. So finally, I mentioned at the beginning that we're just in the initial stages of implementing. And so we're currently exploring a variety of different possible initiatives that we could be pursuing, some of which are up here on the slide. Some of these we've actually started doing, but most of them are still in sort of like an initial stage. So there's a lot of different possibilities out there, and hopefully we'll have more to share with you soon. So I think if you go to the next slide, yep, there's my information. So I'm happy to answer any questions later on, or feel free to reach out to me directly.
Thank you, Mary. That was great. And I know that because we're gonna be approving this article, I'm sure we will be in touch. I also would like to now welcome April. 2017. They were the first ones to embrace this goal, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
To see all the progress in Keene. So I'm glad I'm following your presentation because it's really inspiring. So of all the work we do in Hanover is our residents, and we're a very active and engaged bunch. If you ever come to one of our meetings, among a few things, our secret sauce is our really robust and strong volunteer community committee, who is really active throughout all of our neighborhoods. You'll hear my little one in the background, so I apologize in advance, but she's just learning to vocalize. So next slide, please. So as that was already mentioned, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but we were really proud to take a very, very sort of proactive and aspirational approach to basically putting a goal out there. And the way that our town manager, Julia Griffin, really talks about it is it's really important to have something aspirational that people feel like there's some cardinal direction that we're all sort of striving towards. And I think what we were really excited about was the fact that we had a community-wide referendum resulting in the overwhelming support. So the picture in the middle is our Hanover High School gymnasium, where we actually had our town meeting prior to COVID, and we debated the merits of adopting a Ready for 100 target as a guiding post for our work. We had already been a green power partnership community for a handful of years and had been working with our larger users. But we really wanted something that felt like it would sort of bring the community together around a common aspirational goal. And so we debated it hotly. You see Judy Collett there at the microphone defending the merits of why we should put something out there as an aspirational goal to achieve. And we had a really hot debate, and then, we raised our hands in the gymnasium and voted to endorse the targets at town meeting, which was a really important step for us. I think, and I was asked to talk about, well, what happened after that? But really, it's also what preceded that, which was a lot of work through an active energy committee and that volunteer sort of approach where we're really out in the community. And like Mary was talking about for Keene, we had what was called at the time the NAGs, the Neighborhood Action Groups. We've now renamed them the Community Climate Conversations, or C3. But basically, we spent time around people's dinner tables, and myself as the sustainability director and our town manager and anyone else, the co-chairs of our energy committee, would just be in the community answering questions about what it was and what it wasn't. And we felt like that was the most, effective approach to really dispel at the source any misunderstandings about what it was and to talk about our vision for what it could be. Next slide. And so, what was listed on the previous slide is, after we joined, and the Sierra Club was really pushing for this target, but we found a really broad community called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And it's over 200 cities and towns across the US that are just like us and just like you, thinking about these really deep, and aspirational goals. But it represents over 90 million residents. And that felt for us like a community that was very action oriented and focused on implementation. If you could go back one. Yeah, thank you. Sort of where we were headed, how to get ourselves organized around what comes next and what do we do. We actually found that our size as a small town was actually one of our biggest strengths. We have direct, contact. I can go to the town manager's office as a resident and look her in the eyes and ask her a question. And I can call the planning and zoning director and ask a question, where in the other cities that we had seen across North America who were adopting these goals were enormous. We joined the ranks of Atlanta and Toronto and, folks in California, and there's just a few layers of is that we do have the power to have that direct connection. So through our Sustainable Hanover committee, we met a few months after the vote because we were so tired of gearing up for the vote. We decided to take a little break, and then we established some task force that were really thinking about how do we embrace the vision and the planning cycle and our neighborhood action. What do we do with that as we transition? And then we still had these other programs that we had been running for years, like our EPA Green Power sort of status, our green purchasing programs, our solarized campaigns, and we felt like we needed to continue those activities. So through the establishment of the task force, that's what really helped us sort of dive in. And it was really kind of an exact opposite approach to Keene, which is we talked about doing a plan, a formalized plan. A lot of our community members were really sort of, back and forth on whether we needed a plan in order to move forward, or we could move forward with enough information and then arrive at the steps in a very informed and measured way. And so that's the approach that we took. Next slide. So just to, give you exactly what happened, here's what we put in our article for town meeting, Article 23. It really establishes the initiative and the aspirational goal, but what it means in practicality, and these are some of the frequently asked questions we got from our community members, was, is this a mandate? Is there a specific cost tied to this? And the answer was no. It establishes a framework for future growth, emphasizing sustainable energy systems and efficiency. And the town would be tasked with balancing energy innovation with fiscal responsibility. We determined early on we didn't want to be on the front lines of technologies that weren't proven. And we thought, how do we design choices that allow us to take advantage of things like solar or wind as those costs decrease? So we really wanted to make sure we had fiscal responsibility at the forefront of our decision making, as well as general resilience of the grid. We didn't want to take a really risky approach that might put at risk, the resilience of power in our town. We have a large engineering lab, a large college, a lot of businesses that rely on stable power. So we wanted to make sure that was front and center. Next slide. So just in case, it comes up for you all, one of the biggest things for us, as Mary mentioned, baselining was really important. And for us, getting a sense of what defined the community was a really big deal. Our community breakdown was about 60% of large users. So that's institutional, if you can imagine who that is. It's mostly Dartmouth College. Large commercial, we have about 6 large users. And we have the municipal loads, about 3%, residential is about 16%, and small commercial or small business is about 17%. We are about 3,200 metered households, and about 11,000 people. What you can see on the left is up until our vote in 2017, our electric usage over time was declining. And that was due mostly to efficiency, pushing for efficiency and weatherization, and attempting to begin to think about solarizing, but not necessarily at the municipal scale. But knowing how our community was divided in terms of electric usage was really important to define a portfolio strategy, which is the strategy that we took. Next slide, please. So before we got started in that, one of the important things Mary mentioned, and we've been really singing the praises of this, is establishing a set of community values after the vote that guide this portfolio strategy. We needed a measure for how to say no to certain things, or how to prioritize certain technologies or certain actions that we may take that felt a little tangential to the core work of whatever achieving renewable 2030 goal first, because it was the closest date. But it was really important for us to define, resiliency for the community, a healthy community. We even got down to the level of what do we determine is renewable energy, what's excluded in that definition. Really at the core of it is efficient and pollution free. And then one approach that we took was really defining that we wanted to be focused on not necessarily offsetting a lot of our use, but really putting green electrons into the system. How do we also think about, as we move forward in this, bringing the whole community along, thinking about business opportunities and living wage jobs? Achieving the target is as important as the vision itself, which meant at the core of all that we do is having communications and taking time out of the work that we're doing to bring everyone along. It's really at the heart of our diversity and inclusion statement that we have, and then insisting on spreading the wealth of any of the lessons learned that we in Hanover had learned along the way, in the event that we had access to students, to experts at the college, or to the national organization like USDN. What can we also spread and help encourage across the state? Next slide. It was really important for us also to update the community every year. So on the anniversary of Earth Day, we hold an annual forum, and we give them a progress update on where we are towards the R100 goals and broader sustainability and energy initiatives. Our portfolio strategy, I don't want to go through this too quickly, but it was really about sourcing green electrons. So sort of renewable sources of electricity going into the grid in a cost-effective way, meaning probably like you, we were not willing to pay a premium for renewable energy forever, even though we accepted that we may have to pay a little more in the first maybe couple of years. It wasn't going to be something we were willing to do for the long haul. So cost effectiveness is a really big deal for us. We also wanted to, consider the co-benefits of the environment of social inclusion. So additionality, like I said, how do we think about putting new projects into the mix? And then subtractionality is a concept that we were introduced to through this work, which is, if you're going to have to build renewable energy, if you can't build it nearby, can you build it somewhere where the power source in that given community or area is maybe a dirtier sort of fossil alternative? So how can we offset brown power by putting green power into the mix? So that gave us some criteria for how to prioritize a given project if it wasn't nearby Hanover in the Upper Valley region. It was really important for us to think about the impact of the broader supply chains, and for the town to play a leading role in walking the talk. And Julia talks a lot about this, but how can we make progress in visible projects that show that we are committed to this as well. Even though we're only 2 to 3% of the overall load, what can we do to just show and convey that we can be a visible leader in this space? And then replicability was very important. I know we're perceived as a wealthy community, but we have, economic diversity as well. And people, quite frankly, just don't want to be spending a lot of their, discretionary income on things like energy. So how do we think about maybe using our knowledge and our resources to try or test something, and then get a sense of how replicable it is in other communities or broader, within the broader Hanover community. Education is important, and then we really had a criteria for how and what projects to prioritize. So local, at or within Hanover's town boundaries, in the region or within the ISO New England was also then important. And then if we couldn't, where nationally would we prioritize? And if we could, we would not go to a greener grid, we'd go to our browner grid and offset that brown power. So that's kind of the approach for us in terms of portfolio strategy. If you can go to the next slide. And it brought like the makings of a plan into a strategy that's also then overlaid by our values. So as we looked at our options for electric power, we could go with municipal aggregation, we could do retail supply, and municipal aggregation includes community power, which was semi-feasible at the time that we created this in 2017. In 2019, the rules changed that allowed this, and we're pursuing community power as well. Virtual power purchase agreements, and then community solar, which again, when we created this chart, community solar wasn't an option. And we've since then in 2020, through our Solarize campaign, put forth a community solar site where we had over 20 residents subscribed, including renters, which we were very, very proud of. Next slide. So the key facts and takeaways, what I would say is some of the most, frequently asked questions from our residents were, will this increase my taxes? How will this affect my property value and assessments? And what we did was in between 2017 and 2021 was we actually pushed for explicit exemptions from the tax assessment and allowing, we changed our zoning ordinance to include solar. So some people were really concerned about NIMBYism. I don't want to stare at someone else's really ugly solar, or I don't want them to put it somewhere that it's really just unbecoming of the character of the community. So we put some regulations on what that looked like, and we clarified it for everyone. And that was a really extensive public engagement process to get input from far and wide. So so we made that really explicit. Will I be forced to do this? And the answer was absolutely not. And it's so impossible. Why should I establish a goal in the first place? And the answer was that because we could achieve small wins along the way. And then others just plain old don't believe in climate change, but what they do believe in is stabilizing that power price and bringing it down over time. And so that was really, really helpful. One of the, few of the takeaways that I just wanted to share with you before wrapping up is it is achievable. And we do have a small town staff. The majority of the town staff, it is not their key role or function to think about energy and resilience in that way. We have a small town, and not a lot of full-time residents. We also don't have an exorbitant budget to be spending on this. And it's really through the active support of our community volunteers, as well as our town manager, who facilitates some discretionary time of key staff. And the creation of my position was through an innovation grant, and sort of carved out my time part-time to help support the implementation of our. So I just share it's helpful. We're able to, and when I go back to that original slice of the pie, that 16% and 17% that makes up residents and small commercial is nearly 40% of the pie if you add the town in there too. So you can imagine how much work can be done just at that level without even, necessarily encumbering your larger users. And so I just want to kind of convey that there's a lot that can be done for community action and individual action. And that's something that I think people feel a little overwhelmed by, but in reality, a lot can be accomplished there. You're going to see your bigger gains if you can get larger users on board. And you should be having those conversations, soon, if you haven't already. But we found really great alignment once the town had an endorsed vote by our small and large commercial users, as well as Dartmouth. So next slide. That is it. That is a picture of some of our solar penetration in Hanover at the bottom left, and some of our municipal solar sites all around it. Will be at 93%, I believe, for municipal load solarized by the end of this fiscal year. So we're really proud of that work and encouraged by the work that you guys are undertaking. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you both. You both have so much experience to offer us, and I feel so grateful that we are following you in this and don't have to be creating all of this from scratch. I would like, at this point, we've got about 15 or so minutes to answer any questions that people have. And I'm going to start us off with the question. If as I'm doing that, if you've got a question you'd like to ask, please just put it in the chat and we will make sure that our speakers get to see it and answer it. And please feel free to ask anything that's relevant to this. And as I said, I'm going to get us started. So I know that both Hanover and Keene began their post-vote process, or it may be not immediately, but pretty soon after, by hiring a consultant to help with the baseline data and to also kind of map out possibilities in moving forward. And we, as you know, we are a small town. We don't have a lot of money. I know that this year the town budget is very much prioritizing keeping the budget as possible, and wanted to know your opinion about how essential it would be for us to hire a consultant, and if it is essential, ways that we might be able to fund that. So I don't know who would like to go first on that question.
I don't know. I'll start, Mary. We're in Liberty service territory, and one of the more expensive aspects of baselining our data was that the request had never been made at the community scale. So the utility really they weren't prepared for the request to get a sense of like what community-wide usage looks like. You guys will benefit from not having to take those steps, because every investor in utility in the state now knows exactly what that means and exactly what you're asking. I think the second aspect to it is that there are a lot of graduate students and undergraduate students that are focused on this throughout the state. And I think the resources to help you sift through not only I think the first place you're going to want to start is baselining your data. And then after that, you have a whole community of communities who can also help you think through what that portfolio strategy looks like. I'm going to pause and mute since my little one's crying, and let Mary take it from here.
Yes, that's a great question, Dory. And I would say, so for the city of, hiring a consultant was really helpful to get us going faster, but I don't think it was necessary. We were expecting the data request for Eversource to be a much more difficult task than it was, mostly because we had heard other communities talk about their experience and how difficult it was for them. And so we were kind of surprised when they came back right away with yeah, we'll work on that. We'll get back to you in a couple weeks, you know. So I think there's a lot to what April was just saying. You know, this I think it was probably the city of Concord that asked for the data first from Eversource and really blazed that trail. It was really helpful for the city. We were able to find some money in the budget that was for personnel, and we had like a retirement happen, and so we were able to use that to hire a consultant. But I don't think it's necessary, especially when you have these other communities that have already done a lot of this legwork and you can learn from them. And also, finally, I'll just echo what April was saying about using the local talent that we have. You know, we've got Antioch University, we've got Keene State College, we've got Franklin Pierce, we've got UNH, we've got Dartmouth. So there's a ton of students that are brilliant in our state that can also help out.
Thank you both. That's actually very reassuring. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One is, how do you know if enough renewable electricity will be available in 2030 to meet the basic commitment? Who wants to jump in on that one?
One of the things that we're trying to do is help drive the demand for more renewable energy. So our hope, you know, the city of Keene understands that we are not going to be able to reach this goal alone, not as a city and not as a community even, because we're really relying on a lot of things to happen that are pretty much outside our control. You know, the shift to electric vehicles is something that we can definitely help promote it forward at a global scale. So we definitely realize that there's things that have to happen kind of outside of our control, but we are trying to focus on strategies and things that will help kind of drive demand for those types of renewable energy. And I think one of the more exciting possibilities for that is community power. And I think Hanover is probably even further along on that than we are. So I don't know if April wants to chime in.
I think community power is going to be a really great option to engage right away and to meet a lot of the obligation. The other thing that's evolving is the ISO New England grid is greening, and the future capacity that's being bid into the market. Renewables are, I think, double or triple the new generation other resource out there. And we're also seeing efficiency being bid into that market. So our regional grid is greening, which is really an awesome thing for us to see. And then we also have offshore wind is headed right to our backyard. And I think we can really think about counting on that as a resource for a lot of the larger base load, like the big sort of steady power that we'd be wanting to contract. And so I think that those are all really positive indications. And then secondly, and not to get too technical, but the national level is also moving around on this, and they're actually starting to value those. We might actually, eventually see some monetary value for putting those into the market as well. So I think overall, like, the markets are moving in that direction, which is really going to help us achieve that broader scale 100% by 2030. We will continue to buy some offset renewable energy certificates because that last incremental, 5% is always going to be really tricky. You also want to make sure the system remains reliable. So we're always trying to balance. Imminently going to launch community power here, where all the towns and cities that like to join can. That in and of itself will enhance our buying power and our ability to sort of bond together and get more, sort of preferable pricing, hopefully. And we will have much greater choice over those resources. So we're really excited about community power launching.
Excellent answers. Thank you. There's another question here to April. Please say more about your community solar program.
Yeah, so we launched as part of our Salas campaign in 2020. We had one vendor who had a deep experience with community solar in Vermont, which is a much more streamlined process for permitting and signing people up. And really the complexities are around the billing. You know, it's not like hosting the solar array was one part of it, but then actually putting the credits to your solar onto your bill without having to go through another host entity. It was so complicated in New Hampshire. Well, thankfully the laws changed and allowed for the elimination of that host in the way that it had previously been described. So the entity, had just under 100 kilowatt array and allowed people fractional ownership. It was very intentional for residents. So they didn't really allow large commercial users to buy in. And you could buy like half a panel and that generation would get credited to your bill as if it was on your rooftop. So it was just really wonderful that residents got to opt into a traditional community solar site where they wouldn't otherwise have the ability to. And then primarily it really suited renters, and they could take those credits anywhere within the Liberty service territory if they moved. And that was the really awesome part of it is they could take the credits with them and they're attached to them, not necessarily to the physical structure. Like in most solar, if I move, the 10 kilowatts I have don't come with me. You know, I don't dig that up and I can't transfer it to my new house. So it really unlocked solar for residents living in multi-family housing, for renters, and for people whose homes didn't otherwise have the right solar orientation. So I hope that's helpful.
Can I ask a follow-up question or two to that? One is the wonderful arrangement of being able to have those credits move with you. Is that specific to Liberty, or is that part of the legislation that could then also be applied to Eversource?
It's a great question. Yeah, I don't know the answer because I don't, follow as deeply Eversource's regulations, but I have the impression that it's in the statewide legislation.
Okay, that's great to know because that could be very helpful for us. And then the other question I wanted to ask about that was about the size of the array. That is it true? My understanding is that in order for us to do this, it does need to be capped at a certain size. Is that correct?
In terms of the total size of the array? Yeah, the
Yeah.
total size of the array can exceed, there's an exceedance. I think it's 100 kilowatts or just over that. So yeah, you'll have to work with the developer. In this case, we had a really experienced regional developer who we know, and I think we've always valued that in our Solarized campaigns. We like to know the developers that we're working with. We like to be able to look them in the eyes. They're our community members, and that was really important as we were trying to test the waters on whether or not community solar could be viable in New Hampshire in its most traditional sense. There have been other community solar arrays. This isn't the first one in the state, but this is certainly a move towards, like what Mary was saying, getting at a more equitable access to solar that hadn't really otherwise been explored. And so we really wanted to use this as kind of a test to see if it's replicable, back to our earlier values. And if so, how many of those learnings can we transfer to other communities? Because, right now, and we're taking the hard task of working through all the paperwork with Liberty and the PUC, which has not been without its bumps, but it's finally been smoothed out. And, those residents are getting those credits back to the date they flipped the switch. So, hopefully by the time that's done, we'll have some good lessons to transfer to you guys.
Great. Wonderful. So I'm seeing mostly comments in here. Thanking you, noting that sustainability fellows from UNH are a great resource. Franklin Pierce has an MBA graduate program, so that there are these options for us in Peterborough to help us with our with the work that we don't have the expertise for. I am wondering if there are any other questions that people have. And
someone
if
had messaged
not,
me about carbon cashback and also looking at low income low income carve
great.
outs for solar. And one of the things we're really proud of is this past year we had actually through our Solarize campaign, we got the installers to donate panels. So it was kind of like a community engagement opportunity as well for every person that signed up for a site visit just to see if they could solarize. There was an incentive from the installers, but then also for participating in the program, we tried to dedicate and direct solar array, a small solar array, whatever we could afford, to go on our fixed income senior housing facility that had been developed through a combination of funding, including I think HUD, the town, and maybe some Section 8 housing funding. But it was really wonderful because we built it solar ready and really efficient. And so we're kind of just waiting for the opportunity and a fundraising campaign to be able to dedicate free solar panels, or at least low cost solar panels to this fixed income housing unit, which was a really great thing. And we'd like to do more. We are certainly not leading away on the low income space, but we are very much, that's like the core of the work that we're thinking about right now is how we extend the reach of solar beyond those who can write a check for multiple tens of thousands of dollars. And that's really important for us right now, is realizing our programming also will benefit from thinking about diversity, economic diversity, ability to pay, and that stabilized price. I think Mary mentioned that as well. Over the long haul, we want everyone to be able to have access.
Thank you. That's great information. And another question, or actually a couple of other questions came in. If the state of New Hampshire ever committed to the same renewable energy goals, how would this impact the efforts? I'm not sure.
You want to take that, Mary? I'm happy to.
Sure. I think it would have a great impact on our community efforts because it would just, get more people kind of behind the goal, and I think we'd see more momentum. That's a great, that's a great thing to imagine. I hope that does happen someday, but yeah, I think what it would really do is just put more people, behind the goals and help us kind of work together more towards them. But
yes, some changes will probably need to be made first.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope it can default us out of just the minimum. I think that's where having that leadership would be really wonderful, and it would bring us along up to our peers, I think, in the region to have a much stronger commitment and support.
Yes. So a final question, do you have longer term plans for addressing the heating component of 100% by 2050?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we haven't done a lot of implementation yet, but the city, kind of our approach to the heating and cooling portion of our goal was to really focus on energy efficiency and weatherization first. So the city of Keene has, I think it's something like 46% of our of the people who live in the city are renters. So we have a really high percentage of people who rent. We have very old housing stock. This is a similar story for many different New Hampshire communities. We have a large student population with Keene State College and Antioch University and River Valley Community College. So our approach to the renewable heating and cooling is really to focus first on promoting the weatherization and energy efficiency programs that are already out there, because when we surveyed our community, what we found is that there's not very many people that are taking advantage of those programs that already exist, both on the residential and the commercial side. And so we see that as kind of like some low-hanging fruits. We're also really hopeful that through this community power program and some other initiatives that we'll be able to build up a fund that we can then use to help directly support additional energy efficiency projects beyond what's currently offered through New Hampshire Saves and the CAP program through Southwestern Community Services. And then finally, one of the things that the models that we're interested in pursuing maybe a couple years down the line is to kind of take that Solarize model and use that for Weatherize, and then also renewable heating and cooling campaign that promotes mini splits or air source heat pumps. So those are just a couple ideas.
Thank you. I'd like to wrap up with some suggested ways that those of you who are from Peterborough and those of you who are not from Peterborough could help ensure that we are going to be moving on this trajectory. And that means that we need to vote for Article 11 on May 11th for town meeting. And so if you are living in Peterborough, a few things that you can do, you can write a letter to the editor. We would love to have just a constant flow from now through the election. Yard signs are now available. Oh, and I meant to have one right next to me, but I have it on the other end of the house, so I'm not going to go and run and get it. But we have yard signs available. If you are interested in putting one up in your yard or helping us put them around in public spaces around the town, please email us at the address here, info@peterboroughenergyaction.org, and we can get you one. And if you don't live in Peterborough, please take what we're doing and help your community try to embrace some of these ideas as well. And to know too that the Monadnock Sustainability Hub, which has been helping Peterborough, is very happy to help you and your community as well to do a campaign like this. So if you would like to learn more about what we're doing and would like to give more input, we are doing what we're calling community dialogues prior to the election. And so we have one on Thursday, the 29th at 7 and one on Tuesday, May 4th at noon. And you can register for them at our website, peterboroughenergyaction.org. And most importantly, vote on Tuesday, May 11th, and vote yes for number 11. And I would say almost as important, talk to your neighbors and your friends about voting on Tuesday, May 11th, and voting yes for Article 11 as well. Is there anything else that we need to, let's see, I think that covers it. Thank you all for coming tonight. I learned so much. I hope that you have also learned a lot, and it's very inspiring to me to hear the different pathways that are available to us. They seem very approachable, and I know that, as I said, we're going to be in touch with both of you for more guidance as we move along this path. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Mary and April, for leading this conversation.